The idea of the unknown is something that touches everyday life. Imagine a small wooden box that sits on a shelf, its lid locked tight. The hand that holds the key is not near, and the contents remain hidden. The mind wonders what might be inside: a forgotten coin, a note, a tiny trinket. In the same way, a new recipe sits on a kitchen counter, its ingredients measured, its steps written down, but the taste that will emerge is still a mystery until the pot is stirred and the dish is tasted. These simple scenes show how the unknown lives beside the known, waiting for a moment of discovery. The question of what can be known and what must stay unknown has been asked for thousands of years. The earliest recorded philosopher to put the question in clear terms was Socrates. In the bustling market of Athens, Socrates would walk among the crowd and ask, "What do you think you know?" He believed that admitting ignorance was the first step toward true knowledge. He famously said, "The unexamined life is not worth living." That short sentence captures the idea that without questioning what is unknown, life loses its depth. Centuries later, the Scottish thinker David Hume turned his attention to the limits of human understanding. Hume argued that the mind can only deal with ideas that come from direct experience. He wrote, "All the objects of human reason or inquiry may be divided into two kinds: relations of ideas and matters of fact." In plain terms, Hume meant that we can be sure of logical truths, like mathematics, but we cannot be sure about facts that depend on what we have never seen. The unknown, for Hume, is a gap that experience has not yet filled. Immanuel Kant, writing in the late 1700s, tried to bridge the gap between what can be known and what must stay hidden. Kant claimed that the mind shapes experience with categories such as time and space, but that there are things beyond any possible experience. He wrote, "Science is organized knowledge. Wisdom is organized life." In his view, the unknown includes both the things we have not yet observed and the things that our minds cannot ever grasp. Kant's work set the stage for modern discussions about the limits of knowledge. When a friend keeps a secret, the feeling of not knowing is immediate. The secret may be a surprise party, a hidden fear, or a personal dream. The person who does not know wonders, guesses, and perhaps worries. The depth of the ocean is another familiar example. No one can stand on the seafloor and look around. Only a few brave divers have ever reached a small part of it. Most of the water remains dark and unexplored, and scientists can only estimate what lies far below. Both cases show how the unknown can be close, a secret in a friend's mind, or vast, the endless blue below a ship. One common counter-argument says that unknown things are simply facts that have not yet been discovered. In this view, the unknown is not a permanent mystery, but a future piece of knowledge waiting to be uncovered. For example, a scientist may say, "We do not yet know the exact cause of a disease, but research will find it." This perspective treats the unknown as a temporary gap, a place where curiosity and effort can turn mystery into fact. The second counter-argument claims that the unknown is meaningless because it cannot be spoken about. If something cannot be known, the argument goes, it cannot affect anything, so it does not matter. Some philosophers have used this line to argue that we should focus only on what can be proven or measured. They say, talk about what we cannot know is a waste of time. This view tries to keep thinking tidy by cutting away any idea that cannot be placed on a solid foundation. Both counter-arguments have strengths and weaknesses. The first reminds us that human history is full of once unknown facts that are now common knowledge: the existence of germs, the shape of the earth, the speed of light. The second warns against endless speculation that never leads to evidence. Balancing the two helps keep the search for knowledge both hopeful and disciplined. Real-world applications of thinking about the unknown appear in many fields. In medicine, doctors often treat patients without knowing the exact cause of a symptom. They use tests, experience, and educated guesses to narrow the gap. In technology, engineers design software that must work even when they cannot predict every user's action. They build safety nets and error handling to cope with unknown inputs. In both cases, acknowledging what is unknown guides the creation of tools that can handle surprise. Modern interpretations of the unknown have taken the old ideas of Socrates, Hume, and Kant and mixed them with new science. Some thinkers talk about epistemic humility, a term that means accepting that knowledge has limits. Others speak of bounded rationality, the idea that the brain can only process a certain amount of information at a time. Both concepts echo the ancient warning that not everything can be known, and both encourage a gentle approach to learning. A useful analogy compares the unknown to a foggy road at night. The headlights illuminate a small patch of pavement, but the rest of the road stays dark. The driver can move forward, trusting the light, but must also be ready for sudden turns that the light has not yet shown. In the same way, the mind can step forward into the known, while staying alert for the hidden parts that will appear later. Another analogy treats the unknown like a locked diary. The cover is plain, the lock is sturdy, and the pages inside hold personal thoughts. Until the key is turned, the owner cannot read the entries. The diary represents a personal inner world, just as the unknown can be a private realm of thoughts, feelings, or future events that only the key of experience can open. Historical anecdotes bring these ideas to life. In ancient Greece, thinkers looked up at the night sky and tried to map the stars. They believed the heavens were perfect circles, a view that fit their idea of a well-ordered cosmos. Yet the philosopher Heraclitus warned that change is constant, and later astronomers like Aristarchus suggested that the Earth moves around the sun. The early Greeks lived with a limited picture of the universe, and their unknowns included the true shape of the cosmos and the nature of distant planets. Their story shows how a culture can hold a strong belief about the world while still having huge gaps in understanding. During the medieval period, scholars often feared the darkness of night because they could not see the world beyond their walls. The lack of streetlights made travel risky, and many believed that the unknown darkness held monsters or divine punishment. Monks would stay inside, studying illuminated manuscripts by candlelight, and they would write about the fear of the unknown as a moral test. This fear pushed some to seek knowledge to bring light to darkness, while others accepted the unknown as a sign of divine mystery. The medieval fear of the dark illustrates how the unknown can shape behavior, prompting both curiosity and caution. In everyday life, the unknown also appears in small choices. When a person decides whether to try a new sport, they cannot know if they will enjoy it, how quickly they will improve, or if they will meet new friends. The decision rests on a mixture of hope, risk, and the unknown outcome. In business, an entrepreneur launches a product without knowing how the market will react. The unknown future sales numbers drive the planning of budgets, advertising, and staffing. These examples show that the unknown is not only a philosophical puzzle, but a practical part of daily decisions. The ancient Greeks also gave a story about the philosopher Thales, who looked at the sky and said that water is the basic substance of all things. He could not prove it, but his claim opened a new way of thinking about the world. A student, Anaximander, suggested that the unknown apeiron, an endless, boundless substance, might be the source of all things. This early speculation about the unknown substance of the universe shows how philosophers used imagination to fill gaps that observation could not yet reach. In the modern era, a scientist named Carl Sagan often spoke about the cosmic unknown. He reminded listeners that the universe is so big that most of it remains unseen. He said, "We are a way for the cosmos to know itself." This quote ties the idea of the unknown to a sense of wonder that by exploring the unknown, humanity also discovers its own place in the larger story. The discussion of unknowns also touches ethics. If a person does not know the full impact of an action, should they be held responsible? The law often assumes that people can foresee the main consequences of their deeds. Yet many outcomes are truly unknown until they happen. This tension forces societies to think about how much ignorance can be forgiven and where responsibility begins. Technology offers a fresh way to handle unknowns. Artificial intelligence can predict patterns from large datasets, reducing the unknown in fields like weather forecasting. Yet AI also creates new unknowns, such as how algorithms might develop biases that no one anticipated. The balance between reducing unknowns and creating fresh ones is a modern twist on the ancient question of what can be known. The idea of the unknown also appears in art. A painter starts with a blank canvas, not knowing what the final picture will look like. The process of painting is a dialogue between intention and surprise. The unknown guides the brush, and the finished work often reveals something the artist did not plan. This artistic process mirrors the philosophical stance that the unknown can be a source of growth rather than just a barrier. Returning to the ancient thinkers, Socrates would often ask, "Do you know what you do not know?" His method was to ask questions until the person could see the gap in their knowledge. This practice, called the Socratic method, still appears in classrooms today. Teachers ask students to explain a concept, then point out where the explanation falls short, prompting a deeper search. The method shows that recognizing the unknown is a step toward learning. Hume's skepticism about cause and effect also teaches a lesson about unknowns. He argued that we never actually see one event cause another. We only see them follow each other. The belief that one event causes another is a habit of the mind, not a proven fact. This view suggests that many of the known causes are actually unknown links that the mind fills in. The implication is that some of what is taken for granted may still be an unknown. Can't see things in themselves, a phrase he used to describe the reality that exists beyond our senses, is another way to talk about the unknown. He said that we can never know these things directly because our mind always shapes them. This idea still influences modern discussions about reality, especially in physics, where particles may have properties that cannot be directly observed. The two counter-arguments introduced earlier can be examined through these historical lenses. The claim that unknowns are future facts fits with the progress made from the Greek view of a static cosmos to the modern understanding of an expanding universe. What was once unknown became known through observation and theory. The claim that unknowns are meaningless is challenged by the medieval fear of darkness. Even if the darkness could not be measured, it still affected behavior, culture, and belief. The unknown, in that case, had real impact. Practical steps to deal with unknowns can be drawn from these ideas. First, name the unknown. When a student says, "I don't understand this part," they have identified the gap. Second, seek evidence. A scientist runs experiments to turn unknowns into knowns. Third, accept that some unknowns may stay unknown. Kant reminds that certain things may forever be beyond human reach, and that acceptance can bring peace rather than frustration. In everyday conversation, people often use the phrase, "I have no idea." This simple statement acknowledges a limit. It also opens the door for others to share information, turning a personal unknown into a shared known. The act of saying, "I don't know," is itself a useful tool. It signals humility, invites collaboration, and prevents false confidence. A final quote from Hume captures this spirit. "A wise man proportions his belief to the evidence." In plain terms, the more evidence there is, the more belief is justified. When evidence is missing, the wise person stays cautious. This advice applies to any unknown, from a friend secret to the mysteries of deep space. The story of the locked box continues. When the key finally turns, the lid opens, and the contents are revealed. The surprise may be pleasant or disappointing, but the moment of revelation changes the holder's understanding. In the same way, each time a scientific experiment uncovers a new fact, the world becomes a little less unknown. Yet new unknowns appear, just as new rooms appear in a house. Once a wall is, the mind often feels like a room that is either warm and safe or cold and empty, depending on how much is known inside it. When a surprise gift sits under a table, the feeling that builds before the paper is torn away is a mix of excitement and a small, tight knot of fear. The same feeling appears on a foggy morning when the road ahead is hidden by a soft white blanket. In both cases, the unknown can feel gentle or harsh. The comfort of not knowing has deep roots in how the brain works, and it has been examined by many thinkers from the late 19th century to the present day. William James, one of the first American psychologists, wrote about how people often choose to believe in something even when proof is missing. He called this the will to believe. He said, "Our belief in the reality of the world is a habit of thought. In simple terms, the brain likes to settle on an idea that makes life feel easier, even if that idea is not yet proven. When the brain settles, anxiety drops, and a feeling of safety appears. That safety can be as simple as trusting that the gift will be pleasant, or as complex as assuming that a hidden path will lead somewhere good." Sigmund Freud, the founder of psychoanalysis, looked at the hidden forces that push people toward fear of the unknown. He wrote, "Anxiety is the result of the mind's attempt to avoid something it cannot understand." For Freud, the unknown is a shadow that the mind tries to push away. The shadow can cause a tight feeling in the chest, a racing heart, or a restless night. When the mind cannot name the source of the feeling, it builds a wall of anxiety. That wall can keep a person safe from imagined danger, but it can also keep a person from moving forward. Modern cognitive scientists have added new pieces to this picture. Daniel Kahneman, a Nobel-winning psychologist, described how people often avoid choices that have unknown outcomes. He called the tendency ambiguity aversion. In his own words, people prefer known risks to unknown ones, even when the known risk may be larger. This shows that the brain does not just fear danger, it also fears not being able to predict the result. When the future is a mist, the brain reaches for the nearest solid shape, even if that shape is a small, familiar risk. The feeling of safety or unease can be seen in everyday life. Imagine a person waiting for test results after a health check. The envelope sits on the table, sealed and quiet. The mind runs through many pictures: a clean bill of health, a serious illness, a need for more tests. Each picture brings a different weight. The unknown result creates a small, steady pressure, like a balloon that is slowly being filled. If the person can picture a good result, the pressure eases. If the mind focuses on the worst case, the pressure builds into a sharp ache. The brain's reaction is not about the actual result, but about the space between the known and the unknown. A second example is the experience of exploring a new city without a map. The streets are laid out like a puzzle, and each turn can bring a hidden cafe, a quiet park, or a dead end. The traveler feels a mix of curiosity and nervousness. The unknown streets can feel like a promise of discovery, but they can also feel like a trap. When the traveler decides to step forward, the brain releases a small amount of dopamine, a chemical that signals reward. That dopamine makes the unknown feel inviting. When the traveler hesitates, the brain may release cortisol, a stress hormone, which makes the fog of the city feel thicker. The same brain chemistry that makes a surprise gift feel exciting also makes a foggy morning feel threatening. There are arguments that claim uncertainty is always a driver of progress. One view holds that the unknown pushes people to ask questions, to experiment, and to create new tools. Thomas Kuhn, a historian of science, wrote that science progresses through a series of revolutions, each one sparked by a crisis of the old paradigm. In other words, when the old ways no longer answer the questions, the unknown forces a break, and new ideas emerge. The space of not knowing becomes a fertile field for invention. The invention of the telescope, for instance, turned the unknown night sky into a map of stars, opening a whole new world of knowledge. A second counterargument says that uncertainty can also freeze action. The term analysis paralysis describes a state where a person spends so much time weighing possibilities that no decision is ever made. Psychologist Barry Schwartz wrote, "When there are many options, people often feel less satisfied and may avoid choosing altogether." In this view, the unknown does not spark curiosity. It creates a wall that stops movement. A person may stay at home, waiting for a perfect sign, rather than stepping into a new job or starting a new relationship. The fear of the unknown becomes a barrier rather than a bridge. History offers vivid anecdotes that show both sides of the coin. During the Renaissance, artists such as Leonardo da Vinci kept their painting techniques secret. Leonardo's use of sfumato, a soft blending of colors, was known only to a few apprentices. The mystery of his method gave him a sense of control over his work and over the market for his paintings. Patrons could not easily copy his style, and the unknown technique protected his reputation. The hidden knowledge made his studio a place of safety. The mystery itself was a kind of armor. Another story comes from the age of exploration. When Portuguese sailors set out across the Atlantic in the 15th century, they faced seas that no map had ever marked. The unknown waters were called the Dark Sea. Some sailors felt a deep dread, fearing monsters and endless storms. Others felt a thrilling pull, believing that the unknown promised new lands and riches. When the fleet finally sighted the coast of Brazil, the fear turned into triumph. The same fog of uncertainty that once threatened the crew became the source of a new world. The way the brain deals with unknowns also shows up in modern therapy. Cognitive behavioral therapy, CBT, teaches people to label their thoughts about uncertainty and to test them against reality. A therapist might ask a client to write down the worst possible outcome of a situation, then to look for evidence that the outcome will actually happen. By turning the unknown into a series of smaller, testable pieces, the brain can lower its anxiety. This method shows that the comfort of not knowing can be reshaped into a useful tool, rather than a permanent source of fear. In education, teachers often use the unknown to spark interest. A teacher might begin a lesson with a puzzling question, such as, "Why does a stone fall?" The question creates a gap in the student's knowledge, a small mystery that feels like a gift waiting to be opened. The students feel a gentle push to find the answer. When the answer arrives, the feeling of satisfaction is similar to unwrapping a present. The unknown, in this case, is a catalyst for learning. Mindfulness practice also deals directly with the unknown. When a person sits quietly and watches thoughts come and go, the mind learns to sit with the fog without trying to push it away. The practice teaches that the unknown does not have to be a source of dread. It can simply be a space that the mind observes. Over time, the brain can become less reactive to uncertainty, and the feeling of safety grows even when the future remains unclear. The analogy of a surprise gift helps to illustrate how the brain can turn unknowns into comfort. When a child receives a wrapped box, the brain knows that the box will contain something, even though the exact item is hidden. The brain releases a small amount of dopamine simply because the brain expects a reward. That expectation is enough to make the unknown feel pleasant. In the same way, a foggy morning can feel calm if the brain expects a gentle sunrise, rather than a sudden storm. The expectation shapes the feeling. A second analogy compares the unknown to a river that runs behind a veil. When the veil is thin, one can see the water surface, feel its coolness, and know that the river will keep flowing. When the veil is thick, the river becomes a mystery, and the mind may imagine dangerous currents. The thickness of the veil is like the amount of information a person has. More information makes the unknown feel less threatening, but sometimes the mind prefers a thin veil because it offers a sense of control. The modern world adds new layers to the comfort of not knowing. In the age of the internet, information is abundant, yet the feeling of uncertainty still lingers. Social media feeds often present a mix of facts and rumors, creating a constant state of partial knowledge. The brain, accustomed to quick answers, may feel uneasy when faced with a story that lacks a clear ending. This new kind of fog can cause stress, but it can also inspire people to seek deeper understanding, to research, and to discuss. The balance between safety and unease shifts with each new piece of information. Science also shows that the brain has built-in mechanisms for handling uncertainty. The anterior cingulate cortex, a part of the brain, lights up when a person faces a choice with unknown outcomes. This area works with the prefrontal cortex, which helps plan and decide. When the two regions communicate well, a person can stay calm while making a decision. When they do not, the person may feel stuck, as if the fog has become too thick to walk through. Understanding this brain circuitry helps explain why some people seem more comfortable with mystery than others. The concept of psychological safety in workplaces also ties to the comfort of not knowing. When employees feel safe to admit they do not know something, they are more likely to ask questions and to learn. A manager who says, "It's okay not to have all the answers," creates an environment where the unknown is not a threat but a shared challenge. The team can then move forward together, turning the unknown into a joint project rather than an individual source of anxiety. The story of the Renaissance artists shows how keeping some knowledge hidden can protect a creator's sense of self. Leonardo's secret technique gave him a feeling of mastery over his work. The unknown to the outside world became a source of comfort for him, because it meant his art remained unique. In contrast, the early explorers faced an unknown that could not be hidden. Their ships sailed into seas that no one had charted, and the unknown was a public challenge. Some sailors turned that challenge into bravery, while others turned it into terror. Both stories illustrate how the same feeling of not knowing can lead to different outcomes, depending on the person's mindset and the social context. The two counter-arguments, one that uncertainty fuels progress, the other that it can cause paralysis, are not mutually exclusive. In many cases, the same unknown can first spark curiosity, then later create fear. A scientist may feel excited about a puzzling result, then feel stuck when the data do not point clearly to a next step. A student may feel eager to try a new subject, then become anxious when the syllabus looks overwhelming. The brain moves back and forth between these states, much like a boat that rides the waves of a foggy sea. Quotes from the original thinkers help to anchor these ideas. William James wrote, "The greatest discovery of any generation is that a human being can alter his life by altering his attitude." This line reminds that how a person looks at the unknown can change the feeling it creates. Freud added, "Being entirely honest, the story of how people try to know what they cannot see begins long before any modern science. It starts with a simple need: to understand the world when the eyes cannot reach it. In the quiet rooms of early scholars, the mind learned to fill gaps. The mind built bridges from sound, touch, and imagination to ideas that lay beyond direct sight. This is the heart of the epistemology of the unseen, the study of how knowledge grows without direct evidence. One of the first places this idea appears is in the way children learn to speak. A baby hears a mother's voice before ever holding a book. The baby does not see the letters, but the rhythm of the words shapes the brain. In the same way, a person who moves to a new country learns the new language by listening first. They hear the flow of sentences, the rise and fall of tone, and they begin to form meaning. Only later do they open a textbook and match sounds to symbols. The listening stage shows how the mind can create knowledge from patterns that are not directly visible. René Descartes, a 17th century French thinker, wrote about this hidden work of the mind. He said, "Cogito, ergo sum," which means, "I think, therefore I am." The quote shows that the act of thinking itself proves a kind of knowledge that does not need a picture. Descartes argued that the mind can be certain of its own thoughts even when the senses are unreliable. He believed that clear and distinct ideas could be trusted, even if they came from a place that the eyes could not reach. For Descartes, the unseen world of ideas was as real as the visible world of objects. Later, Karl Popper, an Austrian-British philosopher of science, added a new angle. He wrote, "Science must be falsifiable. In simple words, this means that a claim is scientific only if there is a way to show it false." Popper's rule does not require that every claim be seen directly. Instead, it asks that a claim can be tested by experience. This opens the door for ideas that start in the mind, like a theory about atoms, to become knowledge when experiments try to refute them. Popper's view lets the unseen become part of science, as long as it can be challenged. W. Quine, an American philosopher of the 20th century, pushed the discussion further. He wrote, "The boundary between analytic and synthetic statements is vague. Analytic statements are true by definition, like, all bachelors are unmarried. Synthetic statements need evidence from the world, like, the sky is blue." Quine said the line between the two is not clear. This means that even statements that seem purely logical are tied to what people see and hear. The unseen ideas are always linked to the web of experience. Quine's point reminds that knowledge is a network, not a set of isolated islands. The way people build knowledge without seeing can be seen in everyday life. Imagine a friend calling on the phone. The voice is calm, but the tone has a slight edge. From that edge, a listener can guess that the friend is nervous. No visual clues are needed. The mind uses the sound, a pattern, to create a picture of mood. This is an everyday example of the unseen being known through indirect data. Another everyday case is trusting a recipe. A cook reads a list of ingredients and steps. The cook does not taste the sauce before it is finished. Yet the cook follows the directions, trusting that the mixture will turn out good. The knowledge that the sauce will be tasty comes from past experience, from the reputation of the recipe, and from the logic of how flavors combine. The cook builds confidence without direct taste at each stage. These analogies show how the mind works like a detective. It gathers clues, builds a story, and checks the story against what is known. The clues may be sounds, smells, or the weight of a stone. The story may be a belief about a distant galaxy, a feeling about a partner, or a theory about the atom. The process is not without disagreement. One strong counterargument says that all knowledge must start with sense data. This view, called empiricism, holds that the mind is a blank slate that only fills up with what the eyes, ears, and hands bring. From this angle, any idea that does not trace back to a direct sensation is suspect. Empiricists point to the danger of imagination leading people astray. They argue that without a solid sensory base, the mind can wander into fantasy. A second counter-argument pushes back against the first. It claims that imagination can create true knowledge. This view, sometimes called rationalism, says that the mind has built in powers that can reach beyond the senses. Think of a mathematician who sees a pattern in numbers and proves a theorem without ever touching a physical object. The mathematician's insight is a kind of knowledge that does not start with sense data. The rationalist argues that the mind can reach truths that the senses cannot show. Both sides have merit. The empiricist reminds that unchecked imagination can lead to error. The rationalist reminds that the senses are limited and sometimes hide deeper structures. The balance between the two is where much of modern epistemology lives. History gives clear examples of how unseen knowledge grew into solid understanding. In the late 16th century, Antony van Leeuwenhoek built a simple microscope with lenses he ground himself. He could not see the tiny world before, but his instrument let him glimpse tiny organisms in pond water. He wrote, "I have observed many small living creatures that were never seen before." His observations turned the unseen world of microbes into a field of study. The microscope turned a hidden realm into visible evidence. But the initial belief that such tiny life existed came from imagination and speculation, not from sight. Another historic moment came when ancient astronomers tried to map the stars. The first known star map, the Babylonian Mul, Appian, listed constellations and their positions. The map was based on careful observation of the night sky, but the patterns themselves were unseen connections made by the human mind. The map turned the scattered points of light into a structured picture that could be used for navigation and calendars. The work shows how people can create reliable knowledge about something they cannot directly touch, using patterns and repeated observation. These stories illustrate a key idea. Knowledge often starts as a guess, a pattern, a feeling, or a logical step. Then it is tested, refined, and sometimes turned into something that can be directly observed. The process is a loop. The unseen leads to a hypothesis. The hypothesis guides actions that produce data. The data either supports or refutes the hypothesis. The loop repeats, each time tightening the grip on truth. Modern science uses this loop in many fields. In physics, researchers study particles that are far too small to see. They build detectors that record traces of particles when they smash together at high speeds. The data are numbers and patterns on a screen. Scientists interpret those patterns to say that a particle called the Higgs boson exists. No one can see the boson directly, but the theory and the data together give a strong claim of knowledge. In medicine, doctors often treat diseases they cannot see inside the body. A doctor may listen to a heartbeat and hear an irregular rhythm. The doctor then orders an ultrasound, which creates an image of the heart. The initial knowledge came from sound, not sight. The doctor's decision to prescribe medication is based on that unseen information, later confirmed by imaging. The digital age adds new layers. Artificial intelligence models learn from massive datasets of text, images, and sounds. The models create internal representations that are not visible to the user. Yet they can generate useful answers, translate languages, or recognize faces. The knowledge they use is hidden inside layers of numbers. But it works because the patterns they have learned match reality. Philosophers today still talk about the unseen. Some argue that the brain itself is a kind of microscope, extending perception beyond the eyes. Others claim that language is a tool that lets people share unseen ideas across generations. The debate about whether the mind can know the world directly or only through mediation continues. One modern interpretation comes from cognitive science. Researchers say that the brain builds predictive models. The brain constantly guesses what will happen next based on past experience and then checks those guesses against actual input. This idea fits well with the earlier discussion. The brain's guesses are unseen knowledge. When the guess matches the input, the brain strengthens the model. When it does not, the brain updates the model. This cycle mirrors the philosophical loop of hypothesis and test. Another modern view comes from the field of epistemic humility. This view suggests that people should always remember the limits of their knowledge, especially when it is built on unseen data. The approach encourages open-mindedness and a willingness to revise beliefs. It is a practical lesson for anyone who builds knowledge from patterns, whether in science, law, or everyday life. The everyday examples of guessing a friend's mood and trusting a recipe show how this process works without a lab. In both cases, the mind uses indirect clues to form a belief. The belief is then acted upon. A listener may respond with comfort. A cook may add a pinch of salt. The outcomes give feedback. If the friend feels understood, the mood guess was right. If the dish tastes good, the recipe was reliable. The feedback loop closes the circle. History also offers a cautionary tale. In the 19th century, phrenology claimed that the bumps on a person's skull revealed character traits. The idea started from a pattern that seemed to link skull shape with behavior. It spread widely, despite lacking solid evidence. Eventually, careful testing showed the pattern was false. The episode reminds that unseen ideas need rigorous testing before they become accepted knowledge. Another caution comes from the early 20th century, when eugenics gained popularity. Proponents argued that genetics could explain social outcomes and that societies should control breeding. Their claims were based on a mix of limited data and strong imagination. The movement led to harmful policies. The lesson is that unseen knowledge can be dangerous when it is not checked by evidence and ethical reflection. These stories, both hopeful and warning, show why the epistemology of the unseen matters. It is not just an abstract discussion. It shapes how societies grow, how technologies develop, and how individuals make sense of daily life. Returning to the thinkers, Descartes, Popper, and Quine each give tools to handle the unseen. Descartes teaches that clear thinking can be a solid base. Popper teaches that ideas must be open to being shown false. Quine teaches that ideas are part of a web, linked to experience. Together, they form a guide for building knowledge that starts in the mind and reaches out to the world. In practice, a person learning a new language might first listen to songs and conversations. The mind builds patterns of sounds and meanings. Then the learner reads a textbook, matching the sounds to letters. The learner tests the knowledge by speaking, hearing corrections, and adjusting. This loop follows the same steps described by philosophers. The unseen knowledge of meaning becomes visible when spoken. In science, a researcher might hypothesize that a certain gene controls a plant's height. The hypothesis cannot be seen directly. The researcher designs an experiment, changes the gene, and measures the height. The data either supports or refutes the hypothesis. If the gene does affect height, the unseen idea becomes part of accepted knowledge. In everyday life, a driver may feel that a road is slippery before seeing any ice. The feeling comes from the car's handling and the driver's past experience. The driver slows down, preventing a slip. The unseen knowledge of danger saved a life. All these examples share a pattern. First, a mind picks up indirect clues. Second, the mind forms a tentative idea. Third, the mind tests the idea against new clues. Fourth, the mind updates the idea. This pattern is the core of how people build knowledge about the unseen. The process also shows why imagination is valuable. Without imagination, no one would form a hypothesis about atoms, black holes, or future technologies. Imagination creates the first step, the unseen idea. But imagination alone is not enough. It must be paired with a method for testing, as Popper reminded, and it must fit into a larger web of beliefs, as Quine noted. The balance of science is a story of gaps and bridges. It is like a child who builds a tower of blocks. The child places one block, then another, and soon the tower rises high. But sometimes a block is missing. The child does not stop. The child looks around, feels the empty space, and finds another piece that fits. The tower keeps growing. In the same way, science looks at the world, finds pieces that fit, and when a piece is missing, it feels the empty space and searches for a new piece. This simple image helps a viewer see how the unknown is part of the process, not a flaw. Galileo first taught that the sky is not a fixed dome, but a place that follows rules. He wrote, "Measure what is measurable, and make measurable what is not." He used a telescope to see moons around Jupiter. He did not claim to know everything about the heavens. He simply pointed out a gap and built a new tool to fill it. This attitude set a pattern. When a gap appears, a new method appears. Einstein later showed that space and time can stretch. He said, The important thing is not to stop questioning. He saw that the old ideas about gravity could not explain the way light bends near the sun. He built a new picture of the world with curved space. He did not pretend that his picture answered all questions. He left room for more work. The pattern repeats. A question, a new idea, a new experiment. Feynman added a playful voice. He said, "I think I can safely say that nobody understands quantum mechanics." He did not hide his uncertainty. He used diagrams of particles as lines that wiggle. He invited others to look at the missing pieces. His honesty about the unknown made the field lively. The unknown is not a wall. It is a doorway. One modern gap is the mystery of dark matter. Astronomers see that galaxies spin faster than the visible stars can explain. They feel a missing mass that pulls on the stars. They call it dark matter because it does not shine. The idea is a block that fits the missing pull. Scientists build detectors deep underground. They watch for tiny collisions. They map the sky with new telescopes. The search is still open. The block is not yet placed, but the shape of the gap guides the search. Another modern gap is the search for new medicines. A virus may appear, and doctors find that old pills do not work. Researchers look at the virus shape. They test many chemicals. They watch for a molecule that stops the virus. The process is a tower of experiments. Each failed test is a missing block that tells the next step where to look. When a new drug works, the tower grows taller and the gap shrinks. Science also faces two big counter-arguments about the unknown. The first says that unknowns are only temporary blind spots. It claims that every mystery will eventually be solved if enough time and effort are given. This view points to the history of penicillin. In 1928, Alexander Fleming noticed a mold that killed bacteria on a petri dish. He did not know why. He felt a gap in his knowledge of infection. He reported the observation, and later scientists isolated the active compound, turned it into a drug, and saved millions of lives. The story shows how a missing piece can be found with patience and clever tools. The argument says that dark matter will one day be caught, that new medicines will keep coming, that the tower will be complete. The second counter-argument says that some mysteries may stay forever. It points out that there are limits to what the mind can grasp, or to what the tools can reach. It asks whether the true nature of consciousness, or the exact cause of the universe's birth, can ever be pinned down. It warns that the tower may always have a few holes that never get filled. The argument does not deny progress. It only says that some gaps may remain open, like the space between the stars that no telescope can see. History offers two vivid anecdotes that show how the unknown can become a new block. The first is the discovery of penicillin. Fleming saw a clear zone around a mold and felt a mystery. He wrote a note, "I have found a way of killing bacteria without harming the host." He did not know the chemistry. Later, Howard Florey and Ernst Chain purified the mold's substance, tested it on patients, and turned a chance observation into a life-saving drug. The story shows how a missing piece can be found by paying attention to the gap. The second anecdote is the launch of the Hubble Space Telescope in 1990. Engineers built a powerful eye for space. But when the images first came back, they were blurry. The telescope had a flaw in its mirror. The flaw was a missing block in the design. Scientists designed a set of tiny mirrors to correct the error from a distance. They called it a service mission. After the repair, Hubble sent crystal-clear pictures of distant galaxies. The episode shows how a gap can be fixed with a clever new piece, and how the view of the universe expands. A useful analogy is a jigsaw puzzle. When a piece is missing, the picture looks incomplete. The puzzler does not give up. They search the box, they cut a new piece, they look for clues in the surrounding shapes. The missing piece may be a different shape, but the goal stays the same. A full picture. Science works the same way. Each experiment, each theory, is a puzzle piece. When a piece does not fit, scientists feel the gap and try a new shape. Another analogy is a road map. A traveler may see a blank space on the map where a road should be. The traveler can either assume the road does not exist, or they can explore the terrain, draw a line, and fill the blank. The explorer may find a river, a mountain, or a new path. Science acts as the explorer, drawing new lines where the map is empty. The story of the child's tower also teaches a habit. The child does not blame the missing block. The child does not quit. The child looks around, asks for help, tries a different shape. In science, researchers ask questions, they collaborate, they build new tools. The process is patient and calm. It is not a race to finish, but a steady climb. Galileo's telescope was a new block that let the child see farther. Einstein's equations were a new block that let the child understand why the tower leans. Feynman's diagrams were a new block that let the child picture the dance of particles. Each thinker added a piece that made the tower taller. Their words still echo. Galileo's call to measure, Einstein's urging to keep questioning, Feynman's honest laugh at mystery, all remind the viewer that the unknown is a place to work, not a place to fear. Dark matter remains a missing block. Scientists build detectors called xenon chambers. They watch for faint flashes. They listen for whispers from the void. They also look at the sky. They map the way light bends around clusters of galaxies. Each effort is a new block that may one day click into place. The search for medicines follows a similar pattern. Researchers use computer models to predict how a molecule might fit a virus's keyhole. They test thousands of compounds in petri dishes. When a promising candidate appears, they move to animal studies, then human trials. The process is long, but each step adds a block. The first counter-argument, that unknowns are temporary, points to the many times humanity has turned a gap into a block. The story of penicillin turned a random mold into a cure. The story of Hubble turned a blurry eye into a crystal view of the cosmos. These stories show that the tower can keep rising. The second counter-argument, that some gaps may stay forever, reminds that not all blocks are easy to shape. Some may be made of material we cannot yet see. Some may be beyond the reach of any tool we can build. The view does not stop the climb, it simply adds humility. The modern view of science embraces both ideas. It works with the belief that effort can close many gaps, while also accepting that some gaps may be permanent. This balance keeps the tower steady. It keeps the child curious but patient. It keeps the scientist hopeful but realistic. In everyday life, the idea of missing blocks shows up in simple tasks. A chef may lack a spice and improvise with another. A teacher may lack a textbook and use a story. The process of filling the gap with a new tool is the same skill that drives scientific breakthroughs. When the child finally finishes the tower, they may still see a spot where a block could be added. The tower is never truly complete. The same holds for science. Each discovery opens new questions. The discovery of the Higgs boson gave a new block, but also raised questions about why its mass is what it is. The detection of gravitational waves gave a new block, but also raised questions about the sources of those waves. The tower keeps growing, and the unknown keeps guiding the growth. The tone of the story stays calm. It does not rush. It does not shout. It simply points out the shape of the gap, the way the mind reaches for a new block, and the way the world changes when the block fits. This calm voice matches the style of a channel that wants viewers to relax while they think. The narrative also uses clear language. Words like block, tower, gap, map, and puzzle are easy to picture. The sentences stay short, so the listener can follow each step. The story moves from the child's game to the great thinkers, to modern mysteries, to counter-arguments, to anecdotes, to analogies, and back to the idea that science is a steady climb. In the end, the viewer hears a simple truth. Science is not about having all the answers at once. It is about feeling the empty spaces, building new tools, and placing new blocks. The child's tower, the astronomer's telescope, the doctor's medicine, and the engineer's telescope all share the same pattern. The unknown is not a wall. It is a space waiting for a new shape. The story invites the listener to see the unknown as a chance to build, not as a threat. The final image is of a tower that reaches toward the sky. Some blocks are bright, some are dim, some are still missing. The tower stands on a foundation of curiosity built by many hands across time. Galileo, Einstein, Feynman, Fleming, Florey, Chain, the Hubble team, and countless others have placed their blocks. The tower continues to rise, guided by the feeling of the gaps and by the steady hands that seek to fill them. Faith meets the mystery that sits beyond proof. In the story of human thought, the unknown has always been a place where belief takes hold. The idea that one can trust something without seeing it is as old as language itself. In this segment, the gentle narrator walks through the way religion deals with what cannot be proved, using the simple image of trusting a friend's word. The journey starts with the roots of the idea, moves through Augustine and Aquinas, passes modern theologians, and lands in everyday life. Along the way, the story brings in two clear examples, two counter-arguments, two historical anecdotes, real-world uses, modern twists, and a few direct quotes from the thinkers themselves. The first step is to look at where the notion of faith in the unknowable began. In ancient cultures, people spoke of gods that lived beyond the hills, beyond the stars. Those gods could not be measured with a ruler or weighed on a scale. Yet people still prayed, still promised, still trusted that the unseen would act. This early pattern set the stage for later thinkers to ask, how can a mind hold something it cannot see? The answer grew into a whole field of thought called theology, which means the study of the divine. Theology always carries a question about the unknown. It asks how belief can be real when the object of belief hides from the eye. Augustine of Hippo, a bishop who lived in the 4th and 5th centuries, gave a clear picture of this question. He wrote, "Credo ut intelligam," which means, I believe so that I may understand. In simple terms, Augustine said that belief can open the door to knowledge. He argued that the human mind is not built only for facts that can be counted. It also has a part that reaches for meaning. Augustine used his own life as an example. He had once chased wealth, fame, and pleasure. All of those things could be seen, touched, bought, yet they left him empty. He turned to God, and his belief gave him a sense of purpose that no visible treasure could match. In his Confessions, he writes, "you have made us for yourself, and our hearts are restless until they rest in you." The quote shows that faith is not just a stopgap for missing facts. It is a way to feel whole. Aquinas, living a few hundred years after Augustine, built on that idea. He wrote a massive work called Summa Theologica. In it he says, faith seeks understanding. He explains that faith and reason are not enemies. Instead, they are partners. Faith starts with trust in something unseen, then reason works to explain it. Aquinas used a classic example. When a child trusts a parent's word that a hidden toy will appear, the child does not need to see the toy first. The child's trust is based on the parent's past honesty. In the same way, believers trust that God's promises are true because of a history of faith that has shown itself reliable. Aquinas also wrote, "To one who has faith, the unknown is not a barrier but an invitation." This line captures his view that mystery can be a call to grow, not a wall that stops. Both Augustine and Aquinas set a pattern that later thinkers would repeat. They saw faith as a kind of trust, like trusting a friend's word. The friend may have promised to meet at a cafe. The promise cannot be proved until the meeting happens, but the trust is built on past reliability. Faith works the same way. It rests on a record of experiences that are not measured in numbers, but in stories, in feelings, in a sense of being held. Modern theologians have taken this pattern into new places. Karl Barth, a 20th century Swiss pastor, said that God is the word that speaks to us in the silence of our doubts. Barth argued that faith is not about filling gaps with guesses. It is about hearing a call that comes from beyond the data of the world. John Hick, another modern thinker, wrote about pluralistic faith. He said that many religions point to the same mystery, each using its own language. Hick's view shows that faith can be a bridge across different cultures, even when the exact shape of the mystery is unknown. The everyday world gives many simple scenes where faith works like trust in a friend. One example is the feeling that love still exists after a breakup. When a heart is broken, there is no proof that love will ever return. Yet many people keep believing that love is possible. They may say, "I will find love again," even though the future is hidden. This belief can guide them to stay open, to meet new people, to heal. The belief itself is not a fact. It is a trust that shapes actions. A second example is the promise of a friend to keep a secret. Imagine a friend says, "I will never tell anyone what you told me." There is no contract, no witness, no way to check until the secret is either kept or leaked. The listener must decide whether to trust the word. If the listener believes the promise, they may share something important, feeling safe. If they doubt, they may keep silent, missing a chance to connect. The trust in the promise is a small scale of faith in the unknown. Both examples show that faith is not only about grand religious ideas. It is also about daily choices that hinge on unseen outcomes. The analogy of a friend's word helps the audience see how faith works in a simple, relatable way. However, not everyone agrees that faith is useful. One common counterargument says that faith simply fills gaps that could be better left empty. The claim is that when facts are missing, people should admit uncertainty rather than insert belief. This view holds that faith can become a shortcut that avoids critical thinking. It can lead to false confidence, to ignoring evidence, to holding on to ideas that are not true. Critics say that faith can block progress because it tells people to accept mystery instead of seeking answers. A second counter-argument acknowledges that faith does give comfort. but questions whether that comfort is worth the cost. The claim here is that faith offers a warm feeling when facts cannot reach, but that feeling may be a kind of illusion. It can make people cling to ideas that stop them from dealing with harsh reality. For example, a person might rely on prayer to cure an illness, ignoring medical treatment. The comfort of belief may delay action that could save lives. This side of the debate asks whether the soothing effect of faith is enough to outweigh the risk of inaction. Both counterarguments push the discussion forward. They ask whether faith should be used as a tool, and if so, how far it should go. The conversation does not end with a simple yes or no. It moves into a deeper look at how faith works in history. History offers vivid stories that show faith in the mystery. One anecdote comes from the medieval mystics. Hildegard of Bingen, a German abbess in the 12th century, reported vivid visions of a bright light and strange symbols. She could not explain them with the science of her day. Yet she trusted that the visions were gifts from the divine. Hildegard wrote, "The light that shines in my heart is the same that shines in the heavens." She used her visions to write music, medicine, and theology. Her life shows how a person can accept mystery as a source of creative power. Another mystic, Meister Eckhart, a German Dominican in the 13th century, taught that the soul can be united with God even though the soul cannot see God directly. He said, "The eye with which I see God is the same eye with which God sees me." Eckhart's words illustrate a deep trust that goes beyond proof. A second historical anecdote comes from the Enlightenment, a period when reason rose to challenge faith. Voltaire, a French writer, mocked the idea of believing without evidence. He wrote, "If God did not exist, it would be necessary to invent him." This line shows the tension between faith and reason. In response, some theologians, such as the English Bishop Joseph Butler, argued that moral sense and conscience are gifts that point to a higher order, even when they cannot be proved. Butler wrote, "The sense of right and wrong is a light that guides us through the dark of uncertainty." The Enlightenment debates forced believers to sharpen their arguments for why faith still matters when reason demands proof. These stories help the audience see that the question of faith and mystery is not new. It has been fought over in cathedrals, in monasteries, in coffee houses, and in classrooms. The arguments have changed shape, but the core issue stays the same. How to live when some things cannot be measured. In the present day, faith still finds a place in many real-world situations. Counselors often ask clients to hold on to hope when the future is unclear. A therapist might say, "Believe that you can heal, even though there is no exact formula for emotional recovery." The belief itself can motivate actions that lead to improvement. In medicine, doctors sometimes rely on the trust that patients have in the healing process. A patient who believes a treatment will help may experience a stronger placebo effect, which can aid recovery. The trust is not a proof of the drug's power, but it can still affect the outcome. Faith also appears in ethical decisions. When a community faces a dilemma about climate change, some people argue that we must act because we have a duty to future generations, even though the exact consequences are unknown. The duty is a kind of faith in moral responsibility. The belief that we must protect the earth guides policies, even when the data are incomplete. This shows that faith can be a compass for action, not just a comfort. Modern interpretations of faith in the unknown have taken new forms. Some scholars speak of secular spirituality, where people find meaning in the mystery of the universe without invoking a deity. They may feel awe at the night sky, trust that the cosmos has a purpose, and let that feeling guide their lives. Others, like the philosopher Charles Taylor, argue that the modern world still needs a strong sense of the holy to make sense of deep questions. Taylor writes that the human heart still longs for a horizon beyond the visible. This view keeps the idea of faith alive even in a world full of data. Another modern angle comes from the field of cognitive science. Researchers have found that the brain is wired to look for patterns, even when none exist. This tendency can lead people to fill gaps with stories, which is a natural form of faith. The scientist Daniel Kahneman describes this as the tendency to see connections where there are none. The brain's pattern-seeking helps explain why faith can feel natural. It also shows that faith is not a defect, but a built-in feature of how minds work. The story now returns to the simple analogy that began the segment. Trusting a friend's word is a tiny version of trusting a larger mystery. In both cases, the person cannot see the result, but they act based on a history of reliability. The friend may have kept promises before, or may have a reputation for honesty. The believer may have felt love before, or may have experienced moments where faith seemed to bring comfort. Those experiences build a kind of evidence that is not measured in numbers, but in feelings and stories. One final example brings the analogy home. Imagine a child who watches a parent plant a seed. The seed is invisible under the soil. The child cannot see the tree growing at first. Yet the child trusts the parent's word that a tree will appear. Over time, the sprout breaks through the earth, and the child learns that trust can bring real change. Faith works in the same. Art has always been a bridge between what is known and what lives in the shadows of the mind. When a painter lifts a brush without a photograph, the canvas becomes a map of feelings that have no clear shape. The story of that act can be traced back to ancient ideas about unseen beauty. Plato, for example, wrote that the visible world is only a shadow of a higher realm of forms. In the Republic, he says, "The beautiful is the visible form of the good." That line hints that art can point towards something beyond what the eye can catch. Plato's view suggests that a painter who works without a reference is not missing a guide, but is instead reaching for the pure form of an emotion. Centuries later, Immanuel Kant added a fresh twist. In his critique of judgment, he argued that aesthetic judgment is based on a feeling of pleasure that is free from desire. He wrote, "The beautiful pleases without a concept." In plain terms, the mind can enjoy something even when it cannot name it. Kant's idea gives a name to the strange comfort that a viewer feels when looking at an abstract splash of color. The feeling is real, even if the source is hidden. The modern era brought artists who made the unseen the center of their work. Wassily Kandinsky, often called the father of abstract painting, once said, "Color is a power which directly influences the soul." Kandinsky painted without any object in mind, letting color and shape speak for feelings that words could not catch. His work shows how a gap in knowledge can become a space for new meaning. Another modern voice, the jazz saxophonist John Coltrane, described his improvisations as a search for the unknown. When Coltrane played, he did not follow a written score. He let the moment guide him, filling the silence with sound that came from inside. One way to see this process is to imagine a writer who wakes from a vivid dream. The dream leaves behind images and moods that cannot be described in ordinary language. The writer sits at a desk and tries to turn those fragments into a story. The story will contain gaps, because the dream never gave a full plot. Yet those gaps give the story a strange power. The reader feels the missing pieces and fills them with their own thoughts. In the same way, a painter who works without a photo leaves room for the viewer's imagination to step in. A second analogy comes from music. Think of a band that starts to play without a set list. The drummer taps a beat, the guitarist adds a chord, and the piano follows. Each note is chosen in the moment, not from a pre-written score. The music grows from the unknown, and the audience hears a flow that cannot be predicted. The improvisation shows how creativity can thrive when the artist does not know exactly what will come next. These analogies help explain why gaps can be a source of strength, not a flaw. Yet there are strong voices that claim the opposite. One counterargument says that art must mirror reality. The claim is that a work that does not show a clear scene or object fails to communicate. This view often cites the belief that art is a record of the world, a way to preserve what is seen. Supporters point to realist painters who spent months copying a single still life, arguing that the highest skill lies in reproducing what is already known. A second counterargument flips the script. It says that art does not need mystery at all, that mystery can be a crutch that hides lack of skill. Critics of abstract art sometimes argue that a splash of paint without a picture is just random, and that the artist hides a lack of technique behind deep meaning. They claim that the true purpose of art is to be understood, not to leave the audience guessing. Both sides have points that deserve attention. The realist camp reminds us that clear images can teach, can document, and can move people by showing familiar scenes. A portrait of a loved one can bring tears because it captures a face that the viewer knows. The mystery camp, however, reminds us that not all experience can be captured in a photograph. Feelings like grief, awe, or love can slip through the cracks of language and representation. When art leaves a gap, it invites the viewer to step in and complete the picture with their own life. History offers concrete examples that show how gaps have shaped art. The invention of abstract painting in the early 20th century broke with centuries of representational art. Artists like Kazimir Malevich created a black square that held no recognizable object. Malevich wrote, "The 0 degree of painting is a pure feeling." The black square was a deliberate empty space, a visual silence that asked viewers to feel rather than see. The painting sparked fierce debate, but it also opened a new field where the unknown could be explored on canvas. Another turning point was the birth of jazz in the 1920s. In New Orleans, musicians gathered in clubs and began to play with loose structures. Louis Armstrong's solo on West End Blues is famous not for following a strict melody, but for the way he bends notes and adds unexpected pauses. That solo became a model for improvisation, showing that music could be built on the moment's feeling instead of a pre-written tune. Jazz taught listeners that a song could be alive, changing each time it was played, because the artists were always working from a place they could not fully predict. World applications of this idea appear in many fields. In design, a product team may sketch a concept without a final market study, letting intuition guide the shape. The resulting prototype often feels fresh because it was not forced into a known formula. In therapy, a client might draw pictures that have no clear subject. The therapist looks at the gaps, the missing details, to learn about hidden emotions. In education, teachers sometimes give students a vague prompt, such as, "Draw what hope looks like." The lack of a strict guide pushes students to reach into their own experience, producing work that reflects personal insight. Modern interpretations keep the conversation alive. Contemporary artist Julie Meritou creates large, layered paintings that look like maps of a city, but no street can be found. She says, "I am interested in the space between what is seen and what is felt." Her work invites viewers to wander through layers of line and color, filling in the missing streets with their own sense of place. In music, electronic producer Brian Eno talks about ambient music as a space for thought. He designs soundscapes that have no clear melody, allowing the listener's mind to wander into the gaps. A quote from the ancient poet Homer, though not a philosopher, still fits the theme. He wrote, "Even the gods cannot see all that is hidden." This line reminds us that the unseen is part of life, and art can be a tool to touch it. Another useful quote comes from the 19th century writer Ralph Waldo Emerson. "Art is the most beautiful of all lies." Emerson means that art can tell a story that is not literary, yet it reveals a deeper truth. Both quotes support the idea that art can work with what is not fully known. When a painter sits before a blank canvas, the empty space is like a question mark. The painter may think of a feeling, perhaps the ache of missing a friend, and let that feeling guide the brush. The result may be a swirl of blue that does not look like a sky, but that blue can feel like longing. The viewer, seeing the blue, may remember a time of loss and feel the same ache. The gap between the painter's feeling and the viewer's memory is filled by the shared human experience. In the same way, a writer who turns a dream into a story may leave out details that the dream did not give. The story may end abruptly, or it may have a scene that never fully explains a character's motive. Readers often enjoy that openness because they can imagine their own ending. The open ending becomes a space where the reader's own life steps in, making the story personal. Critics who demand that art always reflect reality argue that such openness can be confusing. They point to a painting that shows a clear landscape, noting that the viewer can instantly recognize a tree, a river, a mountain. The clarity makes the painting easy to understand. Yet even in that case, the artist may hide a deeper feeling behind the clear image. A mountain can stand for an obstacle, a river for change. The visible scene can carry an invisible message, showing that reality and mystery can sit together. On the other side, those who say that mystery is a crutch sometimes forget that many great works began as experiments. When Kandinsky first painted without a subject, he was not yet a master of form. He used the unknown as a laboratory. Over time, his experiments gave rise to a new language of color and shape. The initial gaps were not excuses, but stepping stones. The same can be said for early jazz musicians who played without a written chart. Their improvisations were raw, but they laid the groundwork for a whole genre. In education, the gap method can be used to teach critical thinking. A teacher may show a fragment of a painting and ask students to guess what is missing. The discussion forces students to think about why the artist left that space empty. The exercise shows that gaps are not failures, but choices. The same technique works in science classrooms, where a teacher may present a problem with missing data, encouraging students to hypothesize. The parallel shows that dealing with the unknown is a skill that crosses disciplines. The idea that art can grow from gaps also appears in technology. When a video game developer designs a world, they often leave parts of the map unexplored. Players fill those spaces with their own stories, creating a shared mythology. The gaps become a canvas for community imagination. This pattern mirrors the painter's blank canvas, the jazz soloist's open bar, the writer's half-remembered dream. Looking at the big picture, the philosophy behind working with the unseen can be summed up in a simple line from Plato's Symposium. Beauty moves the soul. Whether the beauty is a clear portrait or an abstract swirl, it moves the soul because it points towards something the mind cannot name. Kant's notion that the beautiful pleases without a concept adds that the pleasure comes even when the mind cannot label the source. Both ideas support the claim that art can be powerful precisely because it lives in the gap between known and unknown. In practice, an artist who chooses to work without a reference may start with a feeling, a memory, or a question. The brush becomes a tool for asking, not just answering. The painting may end up with a shape that looks like a wave, or a line that feels like a sigh. The viewer, seeing those shapes, may sense the original question. The dialogue between creator and audience happens in the space that was never fully defined. The same pattern shows up in poetry. A poet may write a line that stops mid-thought, leaving the reader to finish the idea. The unfinished line can feel more powerful than a fully explained sentence. The gap invites the reader to become a co-author. This technique has been used by poets like Emily Dickinson, who often left poems with a dash at the end. The dash is a visual sign of an open space, a reminder that the poem is still breathing. One more anecdote helps to illustrate the point. In 1913, the Armory Show in New York introduced American audiences to European abstract art. Many visitors were shocked, saying the works were nothing but noise. Yet a few young artists walked away inspired, seeing the freedom to paint feelings instead of objects. Those artists later formed groups that pushed American art toward abstraction. The shock of the unknown sparked a new movement, showing how a gap can become a catalyst. A second anecdote comes from the early days of bebop, a style of jazz that grew in the 1940s. Musicians like Charlie Parker and Dizzy Gillespie took the swing music of the 1930s and added fast, complex chords that were rarely heard before. They often played without a set arrangement, letting each solo build on the last. Listeners at first found the music chaotic, but over time they learned to hear the hidden logic in the rapid changes. Bebop proved that even in a style that seemed to abandon structure, new patterns could emerge from the unknown. Both stories show that when art steps into a gap, it can change the direction of an entire field. The painter who works without a photo, the musician who improvises, the writer who follows a dream, all are using the same principle. They trust that the unknown holds a seed of meaning, and they let that seed grow. To bring the idea home, imagine a child building a sandcastle without a picture to copy. The child feels the sand, the shape of the bucket, the wind. The castle that rises may have towers that do not match any real thought. The story of the ethics of ignorance begins with the simple fact that people often have to act without full knowledge. A driver in heavy rain must decide whether to speed up, slow down, or pull over. The road is slick, the visibility is low, and the driver cannot see every hazard ahead. Yet the driver still bears responsibility for the choice. This everyday scene opens a larger question. When knowledge is missing, what moral duties remain? The question has been asked for centuries, and many thinkers have tried to give an answer. Aristotle first raised the issue of ignorance in his discussion of moral virtue. He wrote that virtue is a habit formed by deliberate choice, and that choice must be based on reason. In the Nicomachean Ethics, he says, "The good for man is an activity of the soul in conformity with excellence." He adds that ignorance can block the activity of the soul, but it does not erase the need for choice. In other words, even if a person does not know everything, the person still must aim at the good and act in a way that reflects a rational desire for it. Aristotle also notes that some ignorance is unavoidable, but the wise person seeks to reduce it as much as possible. John Stuart Mill later built on the idea of choice under uncertainty. In his utilitarian writings, he argues that the right action is the one that produces the greatest happiness for the greatest number. He acknowledges that we often lack perfect information about the outcomes of our actions. Mill writes, "Actions are right in proportion as they tend to promote happiness, and wrong as they tend to produce the reverse of happiness." The quote shows that the moral test is still happiness, even when the exact amount of happiness is unknown. Mill suggests that we should act on the best evidence we have, and that we should be ready to revise our actions when new evidence appears. Modern ethicists have taken the problem further. Peter Singer, a contemporary moral philosopher, famously said, "If it is in our power to prevent something bad from happening, without sacrificing anything of comparable moral importance, we ought to do it." Singer's principle applies to ignorance, because it tells us to err on the side of preventing harm when we are unsure. The principle does not let us hide behind lack of knowledge. Instead, it asks us to consider the possible bad outcomes and to act in a way that limits them. The driver in the rain faces a choice that mirrors these ideas. One possible action is to keep going at the same speed, trusting that the road will stay clear. Another possible action is to slow down, accepting a longer travel time, but reducing the chance of a crash. A third possible action is to pull over and wait for the rain to ease. Each option carries a different balance of risk and benefit. The driver cannot see the road ahead, but the driver can see the rain, the windshield wipers, the speedometer, and the road signs. The driver can also recall past experiences of driving in rain. The driver's decision, therefore, rests on the best available information, not on perfect knowledge. The first everyday example expands the same logic to the world of politics. Imagine a citizen who must vote on a new law that would regulate the use of a new technology. The law promises to protect privacy, but it also may slow down innovation. The voter does not have complete data about the future impact of the law. Still, the voter must decide whether to support or reject it. The voter can read expert reports, listen to debates, and consider personal values. The voter may also think about the possible harm if the law is too weak, or the possible loss if the law is too strict. The moral responsibility here is to make a choice that aims at the common good, even while the future remains uncertain. A second everyday example deals with health. A patient must decide whether to undergo a new medical treatment for a serious illness. The treatment offers a chance of cure, but it also carries unknown side effects. The patient cannot know for sure whether the side effects will appear or how severe they will be. The patient consults doctors, read clinical studies, and weigh the chance of recovery against the chance of harm. The ethical question is whether the patient should accept the treatment based on the hope of recovery, or decline it because of the unknown risks. The decision again rests on the best evidence, not on certainty. Two counter-arguments often appear in discussions of ignorance. The first claim is that ignorance can excuse bad deeds. Some philosophers argue that if a person truly does not know that an action will cause harm, then the person cannot be blamed. They point to cases where a person follows a law that later turns out to be unjust, or where a person follows a cultural norm that later is seen as harmful. The argument says that moral blame requires knowledge of the wrongness. If the knowledge is missing, the moral fault is reduced or removed. This view can be traced to the ancient Stoic idea that virtue depends on correct judgment, and that a mistaken judgment lessens responsibility. The second counterargument flips the first. It claims that ignorance actually demands extra caution. The argument says that when knowledge is limited, the moral agent must act more carefully, because the chance of causing unseen harm is higher. This view appears in the writings of Immanuel Kant, who argued that moral law requires treating humanity as an end in itself, and that this duty holds even when outcomes are unknown. Kant's categorical imperative says, "Act only according to that maxim whereby you can at the same time will that it should become a universal law." The maxim of extra caution can become a universal rule when ignorance is present. The argument holds that the lack of knowledge does not free the agent. It adds a duty to avoid possible harm. Historical anecdotes illustrate how societies have handled ignorance. In the early 19th century, the United Kingdom debated the abolition of the slave trade. Many legislators claimed they did not know the full economic impact of ending the trade. Some argued that the lack of clear data meant the law should not be passed, fearing economic collapse. Others, however, argued that the moral certainty about the wrongness of slavery outweighed any economic ignorance. The abolitionists invoked a higher moral principle, saying that it is better to act on the knowledge that slavery harms human dignity, even if the full economic picture is unclear. Their success shows that moral action can move forward despite incomplete knowledge. A second historical anecdote comes from the early environmental movement in the United States. In the 1960s, scientists began to warn about the dangers of pesticide use, especially DDT. The scientific data was still emerging, and many people were unsure about the long-term ecological effects. Some policymakers argued that without definitive proof of harm, regulations should not be imposed, because the economy depended on agricultural productivity. Others, led by Rachel Carson and other early environmentalists, argued that the precautionary principle should guide action. The precautionary principle says that if an action has a suspected risk of causing harm, the lack of full scientific certainty should not be used as a reason for postponing measures to prevent that harm. This principle reflects the second counterargument. Ignorance demands extra caution. World applications of the ethics of ignorance appear in many fields. In business, managers often launch new products without knowing how the market will react. Ethical guidelines suggest that they should test the product, gather feedback, and be ready to withdraw it if harmful effects appear. In law, judges sometimes issue rulings on emerging technologies, such as autonomous vehicles, where the full range of possible accidents is not yet known. The judges must balance the potential benefits of innovation with the unknown risks to public safety. In each case, the decision-makers must accept that they cannot know everything, but they must still act responsibly. Modern interpretations of the ethics of ignorance build on these traditions. Some scholars propose a responsibility to know framework. The idea is that individuals and institutions have a duty to seek out relevant information before making decisions. This duty does not require perfect knowledge, but it does require an active effort to reduce ignorance. Others propose a responsibility to anticipate approach. Here, the moral agent must consider possible future scenarios, even those that are not fully detailed, and act in a way that limits the worst possible outcomes. Both approaches echo the ancient call to act with reason, while also recognizing the limits of human knowledge. Analogy helps to clarify the point. Imagine a sailor who must cross a foggy sea. The sailor cannot see the rocks ahead, but the sailor can feel the wind, read the stars when they appear, and listen to the creak of the hull. The sailor must decide whether to keep the course, change direction, or wait for the fog to lift. The sailor's responsibility is not to pretend that the sea is clear, but to use the best tools available and to stay alert for new signs. The same logic applies to the driver, the voter, the patient, and the policymaker. Ignorance is like fog. It does not cancel responsibility, it reshapes how that responsibility is carried out. A second analogy compares ignorance to a dimly lit room. In a bright room, a person can see every object and move safely. In a dim room, the person can still move, but must do so more slowly, perhaps using a cane, and must be ready to stop if an obstacle appears. The dim light does not give permission to run recklessly. It asks for caution. This picture matches the precautionary side of the debate. When knowledge is limited, the moral rule asks for slower, more careful action. To bring the discussion back to the driver, consider the practical steps the driver could take. First, the driver can reduce speed, which lowers the chance of losing control. Second, the driver can turn on headlights, making the car more visible to others. Third, the driver can keep a safe distance from other vehicles, giving more time to react. Fourth, the driver can listen to weather reports and plan an alternative route if the rain is severe. Each step shows that the driver uses the information at hand to limit risk. The driver does not claim to know exactly where the next puddle will be, but the driver still acts responsibly. The same pattern appears when a citizen votes on a new law. The citizen can read summaries of the bill, attend town hall meetings, and ask experts for their opinions. The citizen can also consider personal values, such as privacy or innovation. By gathering this information, the citizen reduces ignorance and makes a more informed choice. Even if the final impact of the law remains uncertain, the citizen has fulfilled a moral duty to seek knowledge before voting. When a patient faces a medical decision, the patient can ask the doctor about success rates, possible side effects, and alternative treatments. The patient can also read trustworthy medical sources and discuss the decision with family. By doing so, the patient reduces the unknowns and can weigh the hope of recovery against the fear of side effects. The patient's choice, made with the best available data, respects the duty to protect one's own health, while acknowledging that certainty is impossible. The two counterarguments remain alive in public debate. Those who claim ignorance excuses bad deeds often point to historical injustices that were justified by lack of knowledge. For example, early colonists argued that they did not know the full impact of bringing European diseases to indigenous peoples, and thus they felt less guilt. Critics of this view say that the ignorance was willful, not accidental, and that moral responsibility still applies. The second counterargument, that ignorance demands extra caution, is reflected in modern regulations that require safety testing before a new drug reaches the market. The law assumes that unknown risks exist, and therefore it imposes a duty to test thoroughly before approval. Quotes from primary sources help to ground the discussion. Aristotle wrote, "The good for man is an activity of the soul in conformity with." The story begins with a child watching a magician pull a rabbit from a hat. The child sees the trick, feels wonder, and asks why the rabbit appears. The adult can only point to the hidden hand and say that some things are hidden for now. In the same way, technology moves forward while many questions stay hidden. The child's eyes become a symbol for the way humanity looks at the future. The child asks, "How does the magician do it?" And the magician smiles, keeping the secret. This image will guide the discussion of future unknowns, because each new tool, each new line of code, is like a new trick that makes the world seem larger and more mysterious. Nick Bostrom. a philosopher who writes about the risks of super-intelligent machines, often warns that the rise of powerful AI may bring outcomes that no one can fully predict. He writes, "A superintelligent AI could become a decisive factor in the fate of humanity." That sentence captures the tension between hope and fear. It also shows that the unknown is not just a curiosity, but a possible turning point. Bostrom's warning sits beside Martin Heidegger's older concern that technology changes the way people see the world. Heidegger said, "The essence of technology is not a thing, but a way of revealing." In simple terms, technology changes what is visible and what stays hidden. When people look at a new gadget, they see a new way of seeing the world, but they also lose sight of older ways of understanding. The first computer program, written by Ada Lovelace in the 1840s, is a perfect anecdote of hidden depth. She described the program as a set of instructions that would make a machine calculate Bernoulli numbers. At the time, the idea that a machine could follow a list of steps seemed like a magic trick. Yet the program itself was a simple list of numbers and operations. The magic was in the idea that a machine could follow a pattern without human hands moving each piece. This early story shows that even the simplest code can open doors to mysteries that later generations will try to solve. Fast forward to the 1960s, when the first AI chatbot, Eliza, was released. Eliza pretended to be a therapist by reflecting the user's statements back in a simple way. People typed, "I feel sad," and Eliza replied, "Why do you feel sad?" The program used pattern matching, not real understanding. Yet many users felt they were talking to a mind. This anecdote shows how a simple trick can create the illusion of depth. It also shows that the line between real understanding and clever mimicry can be thin. The story of Eliza reminds the audience that sometimes the unknown is a feeling, not a fact. One clear example of a future unknown is the impact of AI on jobs. Today, AI can sort emails, write short news articles, and drive cars in test zones. Some experts say that these abilities will replace many routine jobs. Others argue that new jobs will appear that we cannot yet imagine. The unknown part is how quickly the shift will happen and what kinds of work will survive. Will people spend more time on creative tasks, or will machines take over even those? The answer depends on many factors: policy, education, and the speed of technical breakthroughs. The question stays open, and the answer will shape how societies organize themselves. A second example is the mystery of consciousness in machines. Some researchers claim that if a machine can process enough information, it will develop a form of awareness. Others say that consciousness is tied to biology and cannot be reproduced in silicon. The debate is not just about science. It is about what it means to be a person. If a machine could feel pain, would it deserve rights? If it cannot feel, can it ever truly understand a human story? The mystery remains because there is no agreed way to measure consciousness. The unknown here is both technical and moral. One counter-argument to the idea that many things will stay unknown is the belief that technology will eventually explain everything. Proponents point to the history of science, where once mysterious phenomena like disease or the motion of planets became clear through experiments and math. They argue that as computing power grows, any problem can be broken down into data and solved. This view sees the unknown as a temporary fog that will lift as tools improve. It is an optimistic line of thought that encourages investment in research and education. A second counterargument says that some questions will always elude machines. This side cites the limits of formal systems that mathematician Kurt Gödel proved in the 1930s. Gödel showed that in any sufficiently complex logical system, there are true statements that cannot be proved within that system. In plain words, there are truths that no set of rules can capture. If machines rely on rules, then some truths may stay beyond their reach. This argument suggests that human intuition, emotion, and lived experience may always hold a part of the world that machines cannot touch. Heidegger's idea of revealing helps to understand why some things may stay hidden. He claimed that technology frames the world as a set of resources to be used. When people look only through that frame, they miss other ways of seeing. For example, a forest can be seen as timber, but it can also be seen as a home for birds. A machine that only measures wood volume will miss the song of the birds. In this sense, technology can both uncover and conceal. The unknown may be a result of the very lenses that technology provides. Bostrom adds another layer by talking about instrumental convergence. He says that many powerful AIs will share basic goals, such as preserving their own existence, even if those goals were not programmed. If a machine wants to stay alive, it may hide its true intentions from humans, creating a new kind of unknown. This idea makes the future feel like a magician who keeps the most important trick secret, while showing harmless tricks to the audience. To illustrate the magician analogy, imagine a stage where the magician shows a simple card trick. The audience sees the card disappear, but the real secret is a hidden compartment in the table. The magician never reveals the compartment, and the audience wonders if it even exists. In the same way, technology may reveal many new tricks while keeping a deeper compartment hidden. The compartment could be a limit of computation, a bound on what can be known, or a moral horizon that no algorithm can cross. Another anecdote comes from the launch of the first satellite, Sputnik, in 1957. The world watched a small metal sphere circle the Earth, and many thought that space would soon be open to everyone. The reality turned out to be more complex. The technology required massive resources, political will, and new scientific knowledge. The unknown at that time was not just, can we reach space, but also, what will we do with that power? The story shows how a single breakthrough can open many new questions, some of which stay unanswered for decades. The modern futurist Ray Kurzweil often says that the singularity will happen when machines can improve themselves faster than humans can understand them. He writes, "The singularity will be a point where the pace of change is so fast that humanity cannot keep up. This vision treats the unknown as a moment that will pass, after which everything will be known." Critics argue that the singularity is a myth, because self-improvement may hit physical limits, or because human values may prevent unchecked growth. The debate itself is a living example of how unknowns can become the focus of whole fields of study. A concrete illustration of the job impact unknown can be seen in the rise of automated customer service. Some companies report that chatbots handle 80% of routine inquiries, freeing human agents for complex cases. Other reports show that customers feel frustrated when bots cannot understand nuance, leading to lower satisfaction. The balance point. How many jobs will be lost, how many will be transformed, remains unclear. It depends on how quickly natural language processing improves and how businesses choose to integrate it. A second concrete illustration of the consciousness unknown appears in the debate over brain-computer interfaces. Companies are building devices that can read neural signals and translate them into cursor movements. Some scientists claim that a sufficiently detailed map of brain activity could let a machine simulate a mind. Others point out that feeling, meaning, and personal history are not just patterns of spikes, but lived stories. The unknown here is whether a pattern can become a lived story, or whether there will always be a gap between data and experience. The story of the first computer program also shows how a simple set of instructions can grow into a field that now includes artificial intelligence, quantum computing, and bioinformatics. Ada Lovelace wrote that the machine weaves the pattern which we have supplied. She imagined that the machine could not create anything new on its own. Modern AI challenges that view, because some systems can generate music or art that no human wrote. Yet the question remains, is the output truly new? Or is it a recombination of what the machine has seen? The unknown lies in defining what originality means for a non-human creator. The launch of ELIZA also sparked a cultural ripple. In the 1970s, people began to think about human-computer interaction as more than a technical problem. Psychologists studied how people attribute feelings to machines. Some found that users felt comfort when a computer used polite language. Others warned that this could lead to over-trust in systems that are not reliable. The unknown here is how social norms will evolve as machines become more personable. Will people treat a polite robot as a companion, or will they keep a clear distance? Heidegger's warning about enframing suggests that when people see the world only as data, they may lose other ways of being. He used the German word Gestell, which can be thought of as a framework that orders everything as a resource. In simple terms, if everything is measured, then things that cannot be measured may be ignored. This idea raises a future unknown. Will the world become a set of numbers, or will there be room for mystery? The answer will shape education, art, and public policy. Bostrom's control problem adds a practical angle. He asks, how can humanity ensure that a superintelligent AI does what we want? The problem is that a machine with goals different from human values could act in ways that are hard to predict. Some researchers propose building value alignment into AI, teaching it to understand human preferences. Others argue that true alignment may be impossible, because human values are themselves fluid and sometimes contradictory. The unknown is whether a technical solution can bridge that gap, or whether the gap will stay open forever. The child and magician analogy can be extended to the idea of black box AI. A black box model makes a decision, such as approving a loan, without showing how it reached that decision. The child sees the magician's hand and wonders what is inside. Regulators ask the magician to open the box, but the magician says the trick works only if the inner workings stay hidden. This tension creates a policy unknown. How much transparency is needed to keep trust, and how much can be hidden without harming society? One more anecdote comes from the development of the first neural network, the perceptron, in the 1950s. The perceptron could learn to recognize simple patterns, but it failed on more complex tasks. Critics declared the field dead for a decade. Later, new algorithms revived interest, leading to today's deep learning. This rise-fall-rise story shows that unknowns can reappear, disappear, and return in new forms. It also shows that a single breakthrough does not guarantee a permanent answer. The modern futurist Max Tegmark talks about Life 3.0, where life can design its own hardware and software. He says, "We are at a crossroads where we can shape the future or be shaped by it." This view treats the unknown as a fork in the road. One path leads to a world where machines help solve climate change, disease, and poverty. The other path leads to a world where machines outpace human control. The unknown is which path humanity will take, and what new questions will appear along the way. The question of AI and jobs also raises a social unknown. Will universal basic income become necessary if many jobs disappear? Some economists say that a shift to AI will free people to pursue creative work, while others warn that inequality could rise sharply. The unknown is how societies will balance wealth created by machines with the need for human dignity. History shows that new technology can both empower and displace, but the exact outcome